Just wondering why my right, great. So wildcats are our last remaining felid, and they're really on the brink of extinction at the moment. So our best suggestion is that estimates are less than 100 individuals or 115 individuals in the wild. But the reality is that it's really hard to actually know how many wildcats are out there. And that's because they're a very elusive felid to study, but also because they hybridize with domestic cat, and that complicates our ability to count them. And hybridization with domestic cat is a big threat, but persecution remains a really high threat. So is disease transfer from domestic cat, and so is habitat loss and road traffic accidents. So there's a lot of challenges out there facing this species. We actually have more cats in captivity, so about 150 across 30 different institutions spread all across England and the rest of the Scotland and the rest of the United Kingdom. And captive breeding is essential for conservation, and it's going to be really an essential part of our recovery project. So how did we get to where we are today? So wildcats arrived on the British Isles around 9,000 years ago. And the domestic cat arrived with the Romans around 2,500 years ago. And the 1890s were a low point for the wildcats. There was the highest extent of habitat loss, and also high levels of persecution occurred. And in the 1890s, then eventually wildcats were legally protected. In the 1990s, people became concerned about the status of wildcat, and they conducted quite a lot of research. And based on that, we then went into the Cairngorms Conservation Action Plan, which was the Highland Tiger Project, which ran in 2008. And that used a variety of conservation actions within the Cairngorms National Park. From that, then a Scotland-wide project was developed, Scottish Wildcat Action. And that project looked at action across different areas in Scotland, across a number of priority areas that were defined, which were thought to be strongholds for wildcats. But partway through that project, the partnership realised that maybe the premise that project was based on wasn't quite right, and that actually the wildcat populations were in much greater peril than people had thought. So there were far fewer wildcats out there, and they were actually outnumbered really by feral domestic cats in those priority areas. And so the situation was really, really bad. And the partnership decided to draw on international help to try and understand what to do at this point. So we brought in the IUCN Cat Specialist Group, an international group of advisors that are used to looking at cat populations around the world, different cat species that are really under threat. And they drew up a status review that's been published and you can see online. But that review really recommended that wildcat populations wouldn't be able to recover without outside help. And that one part of that strategy would involve the need to release wildcats back into the wild, as well as looking at a whole load of other different factors, and of course, controlling the threats. And so it's really out of that realization that the Saving Wildcats project has been born. And the intention of that project is to start with releases of wildcats into the Cairngorms over the next few years. So what are we planning to do? Well, the project has two main elements to it. It's got the pre-release element, and then what will happen once the cats are released. And the pre-release element has two strands to it. One is the site surveys, so checking that the sites are suitable for releasing cats. And the other is the conservation breeding, so preparing cats that can be released in the wild. And David and Keri are going to be talking to you today about those two elements. Then once those two things have been worked on, then we'll move into doing some trial releases and eventually further releases. And the ambition for the project, which is really quite ambitious, is to try and establish a viable wildcat population by 2030. And that's a population of around 40 cats. But I think it's fair to say that the challenges around doing that are really, really big, and they mustn't be underestimated. So that's what we're aiming towards. But we know that there's lots and lots of challenges out there for wildcats. So this is very much the first step, and that by releasing cats and studying them really carefully will it's one of the only ways we're really going to learn more about the challenges that they face, and hopefully will set us on a path to really restoring this species, not only in one local population, but across the whole of Scotland. And we can't do this alone. No project like this just involves one single person. We're very lucky that we have a very strong team of people. So our team is going to be based, the project team is going to be based at the Highland Wildlife Park. And you can see a number of the project team here, Ian Simpson, who's our project manager, and David and Keri, who are talking to you today, and Gemma, as well as a number of other people who will be supporting us. And we've got a strong project partnership of both Scottish and international partners, particularly partners from Sweden and Spain, who will be bringing in expertise from working on other species and doing similar things, but for other species, and really trying to translate that expertise to allow us to hopefully restore wildcats successfully. And we really need everybody's help in this. So the wildcat is a really iconic species for the local area, and there's lots of historical connections and lots of current connections, and we want to use this project to really maximise the benefits to the local area and really hopefully mean that wildcats can bring some really good economic benefits as well. And we've got a great list of supporters, a growing list of supporters who are providing us technical support and financial support for this project. And if you'd like to be part of that list, or if you're a local business and you'd just like to interact and connect with the project, then we really like to hear from you. And we need cat people. These are Ian and Keri, who are on our team. They're big cat lovers. We're all big cat lovers. But regardless of whether you're a cat lover or not, we really need you to be part of this project. It would be great. Cats and wildcats have a tricky relationship, and it's an important one to fathom out. And we really need you to tell us your opinions. It would be great if you could take part in the survey that Gemma's put the link up of, and also if you can just feedback your thoughts about the project. Any feedback is really welcome, and it will help us to hopefully make the project better and make a better future for wildcats in Scotland. And so without further ado, I'll hand you over to David now to talk about the captive breeding part of the project.
Thank you, Helen, and thank you all for joining us. It's a fantastic number I can see that are on this call, so it's a real privilege to have the chance to talk to you tonight. And as Helen and Gemma said, we would prefer to do this in person, but hopefully this is just as good given the current circumstances. Now, we've heard both Gemma and Helen mention breeding for release, and really where these cats are going to come from in the captive environment. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about tonight. My role is the Ex-situ conservation manager for Saving Wildcats, and I realize that not everybody is familiar with the phrase ex-situ conservation. So I'm going to explain a little bit about my role and the team that I manage, and the work that we do in the project. So as you can see, I manage a relatively small team, and these are predominantly wildcat keepers here at the Highland Wildlife Park. And we also have a dedicated vet team and a construction team as well, which you'll learn more about in just a moment. And then, as Helen mentioned as well, although this project is based in Scotland, this is an EU project. We've got European partners, but we also have an international advisory group that provide us specialist support. So we've really got the contribution of some amazing people across the globe to help us save the wildcat here in Scotland. A bit about myself, I specialise in cat conservation, and even more specifically small cat conservation. I've been involved in wildcat conservation in the last 10 years. I also co-manage in the past another small cat global conservation project, and I'm a European co-chair of a Felid taxon advisory group. And on top of that, I've lived in Kincraig in the national park here for over 10 years now. I've had my family up here, And I've spoken to many local people about wildcats, and I hear a lot of amazing, but sadly historical stories. And it's a real privilege for me to be a cat specialist and to be part of this project and really do everything we can to save our iconic cat here in the Highlands of Scotland. And this is our construction team, and like I say, you'll learn more about them in just a moment. But they're doing a fantastic job in very challenging conditions here at the park, and it's playing a really critical role in the project. Now, just to go back to the ex-situ component of my job title, it may sound a bit strange, but basically what we're talking about is managing wildcats or managing animals that are not in the wild. And this can be anything from breeding programs or working with animals in zoos or even rehabilitation centers, but it's animals that are not in the wild. And quite simply, the objective of my job and the team that I manage here is to breed and prepare wildcats prior to release back into the wild. Now, I would love it more than most if it was as simple as that, but sadly it's not. This is obviously one part of a much bigger puzzle that we're trying to work through in order to save wildcats. And there are some really important categories to the work that we do here in the ex-situ team. And these are population management. So this is how we manage an entire population of cats in a captive environment. Animal husbandry, how do we care for those cats? How do we maintain their welfare? How do we encourage and develop key behaviors? And then we have quite a specific element, which is the pre-release management. Of course, in zoos and private facilities, people manage lots of different animals across the world, but it's quite unique actually, especially for carnivores or felids, that captive animals are prepared for release. And of course, it's happened before, and there's many species globally that have been saved from a breeding and release project, but there's no blueprint for it. And this is why having the support of our international advisory group, but also our partners from Nordens Ark in Sweden and Junta de Andalucía in Spain, who have been through projects like this. And with the example of Junta de Andalucía, they lead another EU life project saving the incredible Iberian lynx in Spain and Portugal. So this component of the project is quite tricky, and it's one that I'll detail a little bit more in just a few minutes. Now, as I said, our construction team are doing some incredible work here at the park at the moment. And the reason that we have that construction team is we're building quite a unique facility. And this facility is called our Conservation Breeding for Release Center. And the reason we're doing this is because when you look at other carnivore recovery projects, for example, the Iberian Lynx project in Spain and Portugal, or the European Mink project in Estonia, another EU Life project, or even the likes of black-footed ferrets quite a while ago in North America, there's a common theme, and that theme is having a dedicated facility where you can manage animals, you can prepare them for release, and you can provide all the right resources for that species. And this is exactly what we're doing here at the Highland Wildlife Park. We're building this unique conservation facility for wildcats, where we'll have breeding enclosures, we'll have much larger pre-release enclosures, we'll have remote monitoring where we can not have to be close to the cats, but still monitor and develop their behaviors. And of course, we'll have our in-house veterinary team. And this facility will also be the headquarters for the entire project. So this is ongoing at the moment, and over the next few months, I'm sure you'll hear some very exciting updates as we move forward with this. But there's been many challenges in the last year, but it's great for me to be able to say that this is pushing on and really developing nicely. So just to go back to one of the first categories that I touched on when we spoke about ex-situ management, and that's population management. And when we talk about population management with regards to wildcats, what we're talking about is a captive population. So that's what we call the UK captive breeding program in Studbook. And that I actually manage. I've managed it since 2015. And that's a collaborative approach between different zoos and private holders right across the UK, as Helen mentioned. And we've got several here in Scotland. AGAS Field Centre is part of this breeding program, Allerdale Wilderness Reserve, Dundee Camperdown Zoo, Chester Zoo, and many, many others across the UK are part of this. And working together as a collaboration, and it really is one big team, has allowed us to breed effectively the wildcat population, make sure that we're checking those cats by collecting genetic samples, making sure we're breeding the right animals and building up that population. Because really, in essence, breeding programs are long-term insurance policies. We don't always really want to use them because, unfortunately, when we do, it means that the wild population is close to extinction, as has been mentioned already. But when we do need them, we're really, really thankful that we have that option available. And as Helen pointed out, the report from the IUCN concluded that the wildcat population in Scotland is non-viable. But thankfully, we have this conservation tool where we can prepare these captive animals for life back in the wild. And the chart that you see in the top right just shows you the population growth really since the first wildcats came into captivity about 40, 50 years ago. And just in the last 5 years, you can see that steep incline there where the population has grown. It's more than doubled in the last 5 years, which is incredible. But again, it just gives us that captive population as a really important conservation tool. Now, within that population, we have to find the right animals to breed. And for the purposes of the conservation breeding for release centres, you'll see in the bottom right of the screen, we're going to take animals from that captive population. So we need to be confident that we're taking the right animals, we're taking the ones of a good age, the ones making sure that they've all been genetically tested, that they're fit and healthy, so that then we can breed a subpopulation that will then go on for release. And in order to do that, we have many different tools. But one of those is a population viability analysis, which is quite complicated, but it really allows us to select the best animals and make sure, really importantly, that we're not harming the captive population. So we've been doing that over the last few months. And also what we can do with breeding programs and what we want to do is add new genes. And we can do this by different techniques. We've even tried semen collection from wild animals, where we can actually bring new genes into a captive population, or we can bring in animals from the wild. And this could be, for example, from Scotland, or even from Europe, when that may be needed. And that's because the subspecies of cat that we have here in Scotland is the same subspecies that is in Europe. Obviously, we have a sort of a unique Scottish population that will have some local adaptations, but in an emergency and when we need to increase a gene pool, we do have that fallback option to bring cats from Europe as well. Now, looking at the animal husbandry, and this is when we really start working with wildcats more closely. This is when we start looking at how we manage the animals on a daily basis. So how do we feed the animals? What's the best food to give them? How do we ensure they're fit and healthy? How do you introduce wildcats together? Obviously, our main aim here is to reproduce the cats, breed them. So there's lots of different decisions that need to be made around the best practice of animal management. Of course, we'll have that dedicated vet team who'll be on hand 24/7 every day of the year to make sure that our cats are fit and healthy, free from disease, and that their behaviors are at the appropriate level that we would want them to be at for release. And that veterinary team and our animal teams of Rachel Williams, Estelle Morgan, and Sandra Rainey, our animal keepers, will be working really, really closely to make sure the welfare and the physical and mental fitness of these cats is at the highest level it can be. And whilst we're doing this, of course, we're going to document the work that we can do, because a lot about managing populations and conservation projects is about collecting evidence and sharing that evidence. And that's really important for us so that this project can help other projects in the future. So a part of my job will be to publish best practice guidance for wildcat management and pre-release training and so on. So we'll really be delighted in the future to be able to share those with other projects moving forward. And finally, we get to the slightly trickier one, which is the pre-release management. And this is one that, like I say, we can learn from other projects. The work that was done with Iberian lynx was really incredible in One of the images there of the CCTV monitoring is one of the Iberian Lynx staff monitoring the lynx remotely, so there's nobody near the enclosures, but they can still record and analyze the behaviors of them. And there's other projects that we can learn from as well. And what we need to do is to take a lot of that knowledge and then adapt it to wildcats. And this is why having that international support group and specialist group that can give us advice and help us on this journey is really important. And what we're going to do is we're going to develop and design tools. And when I say tools, I don't mean anything overly complicated, but if you've got a pet cat at home, you've maybe played with the little feathers on a string or the balls in the tube where the cats chase around. And I'm sure when you've done that with your pet cat, you see their eyes light up and their sort of natural instincts and so on. And that's actually quite similar to what we'll do with wildcats. We'll be developing tools to enhance and develop the key behaviors that they will need for life in the wild. So that's going to be a really exciting part of our job over the next year or so. And as we did with the animal husbandry, we always want to be collecting data, analyzing it, making sure that the behaviors that we're developing are the right ones, and also making sure that we're reducing the contact between people and the cats, hence why we'll have the CCTV monitoring, because we want to release cats that don't want to go near people, don't want to go near villages, and that will obviously help them build up a viable population. So you'll see the sort of cycle that we'll go through when we get to these larger, more natural pre-release enclosures. We'll obviously carry out regular health screening. We'll be moving cats from the breeding enclosures into these bigger pre-release enclosures. We'll be reducing human contact. We'll be implementing a training program. And then we'll need to monitor their behavior and make sure those cats are ready for release. And when they are, then they'll be fitted with GPS collars, and then they'll move over and fall under Keri, our field manager's management, and they will be enjoying life in the wild. And for some of those that may not be at the right stage, we can hold back a little bit longer. We can implement a bit more targeted training and then allow them to join the release groups. So this is ex-situ management sort of in a nutshell. I hope you found it interesting, but it's a very exciting journey that myself and my team are going to be on over the next 5 years. And we're really just doing everything we can to make sure that these cats are as prepared as possible for life in the wild. And that leaves me to pass over to Keri Langridge, who's our field manager. And her role, as she'll tell you in a moment, is to prepare that environment for these cats to come back. So without further ado, I'll pass over to you, Keri.
Thanks, David. All righty. Oh, I hate technology. Okay, here we go. I love community events. They're one of the favorite parts of my job, but I hate technology. So it's a shame to have to do it this way, but we'll do our best. So I'm going to talk very briefly about the field program. The field program is still in its infancy. It's really the youngest part of the project. But I'm going to give you just a brief introduction to the field program and to some of the work that we've been doing in the last few months. So briefly, a bit of background about me. My name is Keri Langridge, and I'm the field manager. For the in-situ side of the program, in-situ, now that David has explained what ex-situ means, it's not that difficult to guess what in-situ might mean. It's everything in the wild, basically. So my role is looking after wildcats in the wild. So I was a project officer for Scottish Wildcat Action, which was the precursor project to this, which ran from 2015 to 2020. And I was one of the project officers responsible for conducting in-situ conservation actions in the field. So I managed 3 of the 6 priority areas, Morven, which is down here. You probably can't see, can you? No, there we go. See, what I miss is the jumping around, pointing at stuff. That's my real gift when it comes to presentations. Strathpeffer up here and Strathspey. So the rest of the project officers and I, we conducted in-situ conservation actions for wildcats in those areas. We conducted very large-scale camera trap surveys. We ran programs of trap, neuter, vaccinate, release for feral domestic cats. We worked with the land management community to reduce the threats. And that's my experience with wildcats. And I just wanted to take this opportunity to say hello to any of the Scottish Wildcat Action volunteers who might be watching this, because I haven't seen you for a long time, and I hope to see you all again soon. And obviously, thank you for all your efforts in the previous project. I'm also, more recently, I traveled across Europe on a Churchill Fellowship researching the causes of hybridization in European wildcat populations. And I started as the field manager for Saving Wildcats in August last year. So the field program has suffered quite severe delays because of COVID, but we are now getting off the ground in the field program. So I'm going to give you a sort of brief introduction to some of the general aims of the field program, and then talk a bit more specifically about some of the immediate priorities and some of the work that we're doing at the moment. So in-situ wildcat conservation is everything in the wild outside of a captive management program. We've got two main focuses for the in-situ wildcat conservation. The first one, which is our primary focus, is the work in the release area. So an area has been identified as a potential release site for these captive bred wildcats. An initial assessment has shown that this area could support a viable wildcat population based on habitat availability and the potential threat levels. The first thing that the field program will be doing is carrying out much more in-depth, detailed assessments of that release site. But in addition to that, we also have a Scotland-wide role. So we will be carrying out assessments of additional sites across Scotland. That will include work in some of the wildcat priority areas that Scottish Wildcat Action was involved in. And the aim will generally be potentially to restore other populations as well. And we'll be reacting to sightings and to wildcat sightings across northern Scotland. And that work is going to be complementary to the release area work, and it's ongoing through the duration of the project. But the main focus of our work is in the release area. And that's what I'm going to focus on for the rest of this brief introductory talk. So the potential release area, the aims of the field program in that area are, number one, to assess the release area. Number two, to prepare the release area. And number three, to monitor the release. And I'm going to focus on assessing the release area because that's the focus of the field program at the moment, probably for the next year or so. So the release area is located within the Cairngorms National Park. This map isn't particularly clear, but you can see the red outline. That's the boundary of the Cairngorms National Park here. And the release area is this black line here. And briefly, it's Badenoch and Strathspey is the general area for the release. I might use the word release site interchangeably with release area. I'm talking about the same thing, the general area of the release, not a specific location where we're going to let a cat go. So focusing in a bit more on the release area, you can see Grantown-on-Spey in the north and Newtonmore in the south. And the area that we're talking about is to the south of the Spey. So this is the general area that we're looking at as a potential release area. And we're interested, obviously, in talking to people from the communities in this immediate area in terms of the release area work. So the release area needs to be assessed for suitability. And the site assessments have three main components. There's biological suitability, ecological suitability, and socio-economic suitability. And there are international and Scottish best practice guidelines for assessing suitability of potential release sites. Guidelines for conservation translocations, which this is, it's a translocation of an animal from a captive program into the wild. So our project will be following these best practice guidelines for conservation translocation. So the primary immediate task for the field program is collecting preliminary data across the release area to assess what's already there. I will refer to that as baseline data because it's a baseline against which to compare the impact of our conservation work. So for example, we need to know what the baseline population of domestic cats is, so we can compare in the future what impact our responsible cat ownership campaign might have had in terms of cat neutering. So we need to collect baseline data across the release site. So firstly, biological suitability of the site. That essentially means, is it good enough for wildcats? Could this site support a viable wildcat population? And the main elements of that are habitat assessments, quite detailed habitat assessments. And this picture here just shows some wildcat habitat suitability modeling across the site. We're currently doing more in-depth habitat suitability modeling for the site. And we're also going to be looking at threat assessment. And the picture that you can see here is a picture of hybrid cats from the population on the northern side of the Spey. These are hybrids from Strathspey priority area. So we need to assess what the hybridization risk would be in the release area and disease transmission risk, and we need to mitigate that risk before we can release any cats. We're also going to be looking at persecution risk, road mortality, habitat quality in terms of available den sites and the impacts of human disturbance in the site, and also prey availability is very important in terms of the success of these releases. So in terms of ecological suitability, what we're talking about there is the impact that our release might have on any protected species or habitats that are already there. So we will do an initial appraisal. This is based on existing knowledge about wildcat ecology and behavior. And we'll go through a habitats regulations appraisal, which you need to do if you're working in any European protected site. And that's to ensure that our work doesn't have any impact on any existing protected species. And we'll be doing ongoing surveys and monitoring work throughout the release site to monitor our impact on ecology. And we'll delineate a buffer zone around the release area to account for cats that might disperse outside of the initial release site. And last but certainly not least, we'll be assessing the site for socio-economic suitability. So that's the impact of our project work on local people and local communities. So engagement with local communities and stakeholder groups is really crucial to the success of these kind of reintroduction projects. And unfortunately, as you're aware, and we have already mentioned, COVID has had a really serious impact on our ability to engage with people locally. What you'd like to do when you start these programs is go out and do door-to-door surveys and hold community events and go and talk to people, and we haven't been able to do any of that. So we are trying now to launch these things online and remotely, and then hopefully sometime in the near future we'll be able to actually get out and talk to people again. But it's important because we need to understand people's concerns so that we can mitigate them. And that's part of why we're asking for feedback today, because we want to understand what people's concerns might be, and then we can address them. And we understand that there can be either perceived positive and negative impacts or actual positive and negative impacts of these kind of releases. So we need to understand what they are and mitigate those negative impacts. And for example, something like wildlife tourism, there's an obvious positive impact of that for some stakeholder groups, but some people might feel like they don't want an increase in wildlife tourism. So we need to be able to mitigate impacts of that. So in terms of the current activity of what we are able to do, so as I mentioned, the field program is severely delayed due to COVID. And unfortunately, I can't show you a nice slide of my team like David, because I don't have a team just yet. It's just me. But we have been recruiting the team very recently, so we should have those people in place soon. But this has had a real impact on the field program and the activity that we've been able to do. But we have still managed to get the field program off the ground. So we have been doing winter field surveys for the past few months. And the main part of this is a camera trap survey that's collecting baseline population data on wild living cats. So we're assessing hybridization risk. We're looking at whether there are any potential wildcats still in this area. And we're also collecting data on other wildlife species. The survey is primarily contractor-led. So we're managing contractors to help us run this because we didn't have the staff to be able to do it. And they're doing an absolutely amazing job. We currently have over 100 cameras out over the entire potential release area, conducted this survey. And even given the challenges of the winter weather over the last couple of months, they have still managed to stay on schedule. So they've been an amazing team. The field team are currently being recruited, as I say. We hope that they'll be in place by spring so that we can start doing field surveys. And here's some gratuitous images of camera trap survey wildlife, because it's an easy way to pass a couple of minutes. Here are some buzzards, a red squirrel, lots of hares in the release area. Here's a nice one of an otter, and obviously one of a cat. So this is, it looks like a clear potential hybrid cat based on the pelage. This is in the south of the release area. And just to end with, in terms of current activity, obviously what we're trying to do is get the community engagement off the ground. And a big part of that is collecting data on pet cat ownership in the release area, because it's important for us to encourage responsible pet cat ownership, because that's important for wildcat conservation. So neutering, microchipping and vaccinating cats prevents risks of hybridization and prevents risks of disease transmission. And we are also interested in feral domestic cats because we will be conducting a program of trap, neuter, vaccinate, release to manage the feral domestic cat population. So we're interested in knowing where there are sites with feral domestic cats, perhaps where people are feeding them, or people might be aware of where they are. So we'd be really grateful if you would complete our short survey after this, because you can offer that information. But also, even if you don't have a cat, there's an opportunity just to feedback on the program in general and raise any concerns. So please do fill the survey, and even if you're not a cat owner, you can just not tick those boxes. I want to thank you for listening, and I hope that my new team, when I have them, and I will hopefully be able to meet you sometime soon in person when we're out and about in the field. And that's it from me.
Brilliant, thanks Keri, that's wonderful. Right guys, so thank you all for listening to the talks. Hope you found those interesting. We'll get straight to the questions, so thank you to those who've been submitting them throughout the evening. So the first one is for you, Helen. Peter Connolly and also Veronica Villas asked, will sustainability of the project be impacted by our unfortunate departure from the EU, and how committed are the government?
Oh, great, thanks. Well, at the moment, thankfully, we're very fortunate that we applied for the LIFE funding from the European Union before the funding scheme was impacted by Brexit. So we have the funding for the next 5 years. After that, we're not quite sure what's going to replace the LIFE funding stream. So that is a worry in terms of the long-term sustainability of the project. And it's one of the reasons why at the moment we're also actively fundraising to ensure that we can continue at least some of the project activities beyond the 5 years.
Brilliant, thank you. So the next one's for Dave. This is from Hazel McDonnell. What percentage of the kittens that are born in captivity in the UK will be successfully reintroduced into the wild?
Okay, I think I understand and can answer that one properly. So what we're doing is we're taking a selection of the animals that are in the captive breeding program currently, and moving them to the conservation breeding for release centre so that they can then further breed. But importantly, they can breed away from humans, and we can develop those key behaviours and human avoidance that are referred to. So it's the offspring from those animals that will be used, and potentially, you know, a few adults, so that the age group is slightly different for different releases, but predominantly it will be the offspring born at the centre that will then be prepared for release. And that's really quite important, because a bit like the previous question, it's about sustainability. We want to make sure that the breeding programme continues as a long-term insurance policy. So we don't want to just keep removing out of that and cause that population to go down. So by having the breeding centre, we can sustainably breed these cats for release.
Thank you. Keri, Peter Scott has asked, will there be need to supplement feeding or offer supplemental feeding to the wildcats once they're released?
David might have some input on this as well. Well, I mean, ideally we would hope not. I mean, we would, that's the idea of the prey surveys and prey assessments, is that we're assessing the site to make sure that there is enough prey, enough diverse prey species to be able to support a viable population post-release. But because it will be potentially a soft release of animals, then there may be some supplementary feeding involved in the very early stages of that process. But the cats will be extensively monitored with GPS collars and other technology, so we will be monitoring the progress of those cats after the release. I don't know if David wants to add anything in terms of the release strategy.
No, and it's, you know, it's fair to say that this is something that we'll be working together on over the next few months and year. But I think you covered it all, Keri. I mean, I think I would just add that for other projects similar to this that have happened internationally, sometimes a small amount, as Keri mentioned, of supplementary feed is given in the first week or two, and that's really more just to sort of try and anchor those cats in a given area. And to encourage the development of territories and a population. But yeah, I mean, the plan is that these cats will be able to hunt and feed themselves very quickly.
Great, thanks guys. Helen, an anonymous asker, asked if how many of the cats used in the development of the Wild Genes DNA test were of European wildcat ancestry, and what were the Kitchener Pelage scores for each? Oh, Helen, you're on mute, sorry.
Actually, the details of, so all the details of that genetic test have been publicly available online in a protocol since about 2014, so we can send you the link for that. But in terms of, at that point, the animals that were used to develop the test, it was 5 samples from Germany and 5 samples from Scotland, and they all had a Pelage score of 18 or more. That's quite a small number of samples, and subsequently we've run a lot of other kind of background checks on how well the test performs, including, for example, comparing it to whole genome data. So there's actually a lot of genetic work, some of which has been published as well, and some of which is still in progress, but we can definitely pass on all those links to you if you're interested. Thanks.
Brilliant, thanks Helen. Dave, Ian Pepperell asked, what can institutions which hold ambassador wildcats actively be doing to best support the conservation project?
Great question, and thanks for that. And just to sort of, as a reference point, when I talk about the captive breeding program, or rather the number of holders around the UK that have wildcats, not all of those are breeding. But it doesn't mean they're any less important. In order for us to grow a captive population effectively, it's not just about breeding as much as you can, as fast as you can. It's being very selective, and sometimes not all of those animals can breed, and we need institutions to be able to hold those animals so that we can pair up different animals and so on. So for an institution that maybe has cats, or ambassador cats is regarded by some, then I would say, well, if further down the line you can offer more space to hold wildcats and really use them to raise awareness. Not everybody is aware of the sort of details that we're giving out tonight about the plight of the wildcat and how we need to do everything we can to save it, and of course the valuable role that breeding program plays. So offering space, raising awareness is obviously a great one. And then any kind of fundraising that can contribute to the likes of the centre or the project, or even smaller specific elements that we have on the website, sort of gift ladder type of thing, they're always greatly appreciated. So hopefully a few ways in there to stay connected with the project and keep the momentum going for wildcat conservation.
Great, thanks, Dave. Keri, one for you. Mike asked, after 2030, do you have any possible continued places for introduction for Scottish wildcats, for example, the Clashendaric Forest?
Okay, well, I'm not sure why the specific date of 2030, but we are currently, as part of this project, we are assessing the suitability of other sites in addition to the release area. So there's currently habitat modelling, some quite sophisticated habitat modelling work that's being done in collaboration with other researchers. That's looking at all the information about wildcat habitat use that's taken place over the last 5-10 years and applying that to habitat availability in Scotland to look at other potential sites where we can release cats. So for now, our focus is in this particular release area because we feel like the approach of focusing on one particular area and focusing all our efforts on that is more likely to be successful, but we are assessing other areas at the same time. And Clashendaric is part of the Strathbogie Wildcat Priority Area, which Scottish Wildcat Action worked in for the last 5 years, conducting in-situ conservation action. And we still work with project partners in Clashendaric and in the Wildcat Priority areas. So survey work is ongoing, and it potentially it might be one of the sites, but we don't know yet because we haven't done those kind of assessments, but we wouldn't rule anything out.
Great, thank you. Right, so Helen, there's one from Christy O. She says, you mentioned you use genetic information to monitor the wildcats. Could you expand upon this? And what do you collect and what are you looking for?
Thanks very much for that question. Yeah, so we've done a whole variety of different types of genetic research, but generally every single cat that we handle, whether that's in captivity or in the wild, is tested using a genetic test to understand the level of hybridization. So that test assesses the percentage of wildcat DNA ancestry and the percentage of domestic cat DNA ancestry. And so we use that on a variety of different samples. That could be a blood sample taken from the captive collection. It could be a hair sample that Keri and her team have collected in the field, or a scat sample. And so there's a whole variety of different things. We've also looked at some old museum samples to try and improve our understanding of what has happened to cats historically. So there's a wide range of different things. And now, as DNA technology develops, which it has done massively in the last 10 years, we're starting to use whole genome sequencing to really do a deep dive into wildcat genetics.
Brilliant, thank you. So another anonymous question, some shy people tonight. This is for David. How many of the cats are from European stock?
Currently in the breeding program, there are none, but this is an option that we're looking at for many different reasons: sustainability, increasing and managing the gene diversity of the population. So there's none in the population just now, but it's certainly something that we're exploring to boost the population moving forward.
Great, thanks. And one for Keri from Jennifer Dodd. My question was about your baseline data collection. Will you also be collecting data from control locations to show that any effect is due to your interventions and not a result of natural variability within the release site area?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. Practically, that's very difficult to do because you have a very limited resource pool, and you do have to focus all your resources on the site that we're working in. I mean, we will continue monitoring work in certain of the wildcat priority areas, so we can compare certain things like prey availability, for example. But we will have a baseline data in the sense that we will be comparing that with our subsequent monitoring activity. But to just have areas across northern Scotland that purely function as a control site is just beyond the scope of what is a conservation project rather than a research project. So we interpret the results of that research with those caveats, with the awareness that we don't have control sites to be able to do those kind of relative comparisons. But generally speaking, it's not within the scope of a conservation project like this because we just can't resource that kind of work. But it's a very good question, it's a very good point, and it's something people really wish they could do, but it's generally just not a possibility.
Yeah, that makes sense. David, one for you. SI asked, what does species-specific biosecurity mean?
That's another good question. I mean, to be honest, it perhaps should have been taxa specific, but the point with the point that I'm making there is that obviously an important element to the Conservation Breeding Centre is biosecurity. We want to stop any potential disease getting in, and that could be from animals walking around nearby or people moving around. So making sure that we have the right biosecure barriers in place, and that can be from foot dips, or it can be from fencing around the site, or as we've all been doing for the last year, sanitizing our hands when animal keepers are moving from one enclosure to the other. And we know that wildcats are a bit more, they can be at risk from some different diseases or parasites to other felid species. So making sure that we have the right barriers for the problematic diseases that could be a threat to a wildcat are in place. Of course, many of the feline diseases can pass from one species to the other, but we know from other small cat species that some are a bit more problematic to some than others.
Yeah, of course. So Keri, one for you. Andy Gallagher asks, how widespread are your surveys?
Sorry, my laptop did not want me to answer that question. How widespread are our surveys? So the focus of the survey work at the moment is in the release area, and the surveys cover the entire release area, so which is about 200 square kilometers. So for example, the camera trap survey that we are currently doing has been planned very carefully so that that survey design is such that with the resources we've got, we can do a proper site assessment of the population. So we'll those cameras that we have out at the moment are spaced across that release site to be able to do proper population analysis on that release site. And the same will be true of the prey surveys when they start. So there'll be stratified sampling for the prey surveys, but they will take place across the entire release area. And the same for community surveys and social surveys. It's the entire release area that we're working in, which is why we're very keen to recruit the rest of the field team as quick as possible, because obviously this is quite a lot of work. So we've been very lucky to have contractor help with this, but it's a very, very big undertaking. We already have a huge amount of data management and data handling, and data analysis is a very big part of what the field team do. But it's no mean feat. It's a big site, and we're talking about the whole area in these surveys.
Yeah. I think we've got time for one more, so Dave will end on this one. Out of curiosity, how does one go about collecting a wild semen sample?
Yeah, I knew that question was going to crop up. Well, I mean, I'll start by saying the reason why we did it was, as I mentioned previously, it's another technique to try and bring new genes into a population without actually having to bring the animal. So we trialed that in 2017, I think it was, and it was quite interesting, quite fun as well. But what we had done working with the Scottish Wildcat Action field team that Keri was part of, we had already identified potential wildcats on camera traps. So what we did is we could also identify the sex of those cats based on the camera trap images. So we knew that we were going after a suitable cat. Of course, trying to get semen from a female cat is even more difficult. So we knew that we had the right target cats. And what we did is we continued to monitor very closely the area that they were in, and then we cage trapped them. At the same time, we were able to do detailed health screening of those cats, collect genetic samples, and then collect semen. So that's how we did it. We did have to sort of go into the field at sort of 12 o'clock at night, 2 o'clock in the morning. We were in a white transit van parked in a car park, trying to get semen from a cat. So it looked incredibly dodgy, but there was the purpose of it was, of course, very valuable. So hopefully that answers the question without too many details, but thank you for asking.
Yes, thank you to everyone that asked questions tonight. I appreciate, I can see there's tons and tons of questions we haven't managed to get to, but we will get back to you on those questions if you just add them at the bottom of the survey, like I mentioned earlier. So I just want to say thank you so much to the team for doing their presentations, and to you guys especially for joining us this evening. I can't believe nearly 400 of you turned out tonight, so thank you very much. I'd also like to thank all of our supporters. I know some of you are watching this evening. Thank you for helping us ensure that this project is a success. We're very grateful. So yeah, just to draw attention again to the survey, the link is in the chat box, but it will also pop up when you close the webinar shortly. If you could just take 5 minutes to fill that out, we would really appreciate it. And as I said earlier, that will help contribute towards wildcat conservation in Scotland, and it will definitely help us move this project forward. And as I said before, if we didn't manage to get to your question, please do add it at the bottom, and I personally will make sure that we get back to you as soon as possible. So the thing that we really want to get across is that we want this project to be yours as much as ours, and together we really are saving wildcats. So we hope that you'll keep talking to us. Please do get in touch if you have any further questions or suggestions for us. We're always keen to hear them. You can do that via social media. I'll just share my screen with you now. And yeah, and if you can either comment on any of our social media platforms, and you can also just close that. You can also visit our website as well, or you can contact us on wildcats@rsss.org.uk. You can also sign up for our e-newsletter on the website as well, which I highly recommend if you want to keep up to date with the project news. We send that out every 2 months. So thank you all again for joining us. We really appreciate it, and we hope that you'll continue to join us on our journey to restoring the wildcat to Scotland. So thank you and good night.